Good evening, viewers, and welcome to this week's edition of 2020 Vision, where the guests, like buses, have lined up to join us tonight. So before we go any further, let's introduce them to you. We have Jack Halinski-Kirkpatrick. He's from North London at the moment, but he's been looking at the USA for a while, so he's going to come in as our fact man. We have Tom Zagoria, who, welcome back, Tom, who I think has currently escaped to North England at the moment, but is fundamentally based on the Isle of Dogs, although before that he was based out in California. Also joining us from California, although previously a resident of Boston, which I understand is on the other side of the United States, we have Priya Kumar as well. So welcome, Priya. Welcome, Jack. Welcome to all of you. And tonight we're going to be looking at that great event across the ocean at the US presidential election. I think the first polling stations are probably just about closing now, but they're going to be closing right through till our breakfast time. So we're going to indulge ourselves in some speculation. If you have a viewpoint, if you would like to speculate, or if you disagree with what this lot are saying, you can ring in 0208 1234507. So you're very welcome to join us. So now let's get down to it. Let's get down to the important things. Jack, I'm going to put you on the spot first. Very simple question: who's going to win?
I don't think it's the time to make
tragically we
predictions.
can't hear you, Jack. Or tragically
Pardon?
I can't.
Hello?
So right, let's switch over to while Jack is Jack, are you there now?
Hello.
Oh,
yep, I'm here.
Oh yes, yeah, that's brilliant. Okay, who's going to win then?
Hi. Yeah. So as I was trying to say, I don't think it's the time to make predictions at the moment. We live in a very, very unstable time where everything that seems fixed and predicted is turned on its head. Now, obviously, at the moment, the polls do say that it's quite likely that Joe Biden is going to win. He has a national polling lead of about 8%. And in many of the swing states, so the way that US elections work is each state has its own election, so to speak, and each state has a certain number of electoral college votes, and there are some states are very kind of solidly pro-Democrat, some are very solidly pro-Republican, and there are a number of swing states. And in those swing states, whilst the margins might be closer than the national leads, it still seems like Biden does have a lead in those too. As I said, people said that Trump couldn't win in 2016. People said that Brexit couldn't happen. And so I don't think you can ever rule anything out.
Okay, so that's... You're firmly on the fence then. What about you, Priya? You're actually out there in the States. Who do you think is going to win?
I agree with Jack. It's still too early to say anything.
Muted as well. We can't hear you, Priya. So
yes, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, there you are. Lovely.
Okay,
so, Priya,
wonderful. Well, Jenny, I agree with Jack. It's too early to say right now as well. I certainly hope that the better candidate wins. And yes, I've been following the polls quite well until now. And it's showing that Biden does have a lead, but at the last minute, anything could happen. So it's too early to say.
Okay. So that's you and Jack are both on the fence. Tom, what do you think? Who do you think is going to win?
Well, I think, can you hear me all right?
Yeah. Tom is also quiet.
Brilliant.
Maybe we'll get it. Yes, we'll get you back in
a
second.
Now?
Yes, Tom, that's lovely. Yes. What's
fantastic.
Your view?
So, I mean, some very good, I think, solid pundit answers from the other two. I guess obviously, it is too early to tell. If I was going to speculate, I mean, Biden clearly has an advantage. The only thing I'd add to the good answers from the other two is it feels like Biden, in order to win, there's kind of two strategies. He needs to pick up either these kind of states in the South, which are growing steadily more diverse. So the kind of Georgia, the Florida, North Carolina, Arizona, potentially even Texas could be in play. And if he does that, he'll be president. Alternatively, he can win Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, these kind of old post-industrial or still industrial states. In the North, it looks from the polls like he's got a reasonable chance on both sides. But if Trump manages to hold on in all of those swathes of marginal states, then he could still win. I think I'm happy to speculate. I think it's probably most likely that Biden will win. But we'll obviously see in a few hours' time. And I think there's a reasonable chance, even if Biden wins in 2020, that Trump could be straight back in 2024. That's the way American politics seems to work. So we'll find out.
He'll be really old by then. He's what, 74 now? Can you really?
He'll be as old as Biden is now.
Yes, he will be, pretty much, yes. Okay, well, I mean, cards on the table. I'm a natural pessimist, so I assume that Trump is going to win, but that's just jumping to conclusions. Okay, so let's look at what Trump has meant in the States. Priya, have you always lived in the States, or are you there anew?
Yes, I was born in California, actually. And then 10 years later, I migrated to Boston for higher studies, which was my home until my husband got a job offer back in Long Beach. So we are back in the States, but I'm
Excellent.
a U.S.
Yeah, so how has it felt, if you actually live there, how has it felt to have Donald Trump as your president?
Well, definitely. Last time in the election, to me, it just seemed that we were voting against one candidate who is a little worse than the other. And I would have loved to see Hillary in the polls. So it was kind of disappointing to see Trump. And it's been difficult to have someone who's discrediting everything. He's discrediting science. He's discrediting evidence, the truth. He's putting down Democrats. He's putting down women. So it's not been very pleasant, unfortunately. And also minorities are being attacked. So I feel bad to see that.
Indeed. So, I mean, Jack, how do you feel about Trump? So Trump keeps telling us he's worked an economic miracle in the States. I mean, is that right, or is he deluded?
Yes, well, Trump certainly likes to brag about himself and his various achievements. I think it's quite clear, though, that, I mean, Trump made a lot of promises around the 2016 election, and he's not really fulfilled on any of them. He had promised to end Obamacare and replace it with something better, but he still has no plan whatsoever on healthcare. He promised to invest hugely in infrastructure, but he's carried out no major public works really at all in the past 4 years. He promised to bring back manufacturing and coal mining, but the US now actually has less coal miners than when he was elected, and manufacturing as a share of GDP is actually the lowest that it's been in 73 years. And in terms of growth and working miracles, he promised 5 to 6% GDP growth. That was hovering around 3%, but then obviously we've had the huge economic crisis this year, which I think was sparked by coronavirus, but not caused by it. I think that there were a lot of this was coming basically, and just needed one thing to cause it, and this has caused an enormous slump. And now the economy is, I think, about 3% smaller than 1 year ago.
That's incredible. I mean, that's not the impression he gives at all. I mean, he's just lying then. I mean, Tom, how do your friends and relatives in the States feel? Do they feel that jobs are easy to come by and everything's going well?
No, absolutely not. And I think there's very hard economic times ahead. I guess the one thing that I'd be able to say from my own family dotted around the States is people are very set in their views. People will believe one narrative or the other narrative, and the kind of actual economic indicators don't necessarily fall into it. And Trump does have like a few success stories he could point to. He could say that his tariffs did probably save a few thousand steel jobs in the Midwest. He's got, it's not like America's economic strategy prior to Trump. I mean, that was what led to the 2008 financial crash. That was what led to everything falling apart, and Biden was a part of that. So he can point to that, 40 years of neoliberalism. And even if he is pursuing neoliberalism on steroids, he can still plausibly tell his supporters, it's not just down to me. It was a mess when I came in. I was helping it. I think that's the kind of the situation we're in. I think actually it's quite impressive that Trump hasn't managed to get a boost off of coronavirus, because virtually every other world leader has become more popular. So it's an achievement for Trump to have become less popular just by the sheer idiocy of his response. But I mean, we'll see whether that bears out in the final results.
And absolutely. So, well, I mean, Jack, you mentioned coronavirus. I mean, there's perhaps we can ask Priya. Do people really believe what Trump says? He seems to. What worried me about Trump and corona, particularly what stood out for me, was when he announced at that election rally that he was immune now that he'd had the illness. He would now be immune. He could not be reinfected. And then he threatened to kiss the several thousand of people there, from which I deduced that he didn't understand the difference between being immune and being infectious. And I thought that was particularly worrying. How is his handling of corona actually going down in the States? Are people impressed?
I'm sorry to say, but I'm not impressed with the way Trump has been handling this COVID situation. You see, when coronavirus first came out, he was just saying that it's a hoax. He was addressing it not as an infectious disease. He was addressing it as the Chinese virus, which could be offensive to certain people. He's just been discrediting science, as I said. Doctors are recommending different strategies where he's predicting other things. He was just saying that having Clorox could cure this virus, whereas that's absolutely bizarre. And other thing is that while doctors and healthcare professionals are saying wear the mask, when he has rallies, there's a lot of people without masks, unfortunately. So, yeah. And he just promised that coronavirus would be over by summer, but according to experts, it is not going to be over until 2021. And he himself was also infected. So it clearly shows that this is a very serious illness and it should not be taken lightly.
So who does, on the basis of that description, who does Trump remind you of, Tom?
Well, I mean, obviously over here we've got our own mini Trump, who also was infected by the virus. I mean, I suppose the difference is Boris did manage to get, a boost in public support. He has stuck to message slightly more than Trump has in the States. I mean, I one other aspect of it is obviously in the US, you've got this federal system in which different states have so many different powers. I mean, the governor of Michigan, the Democratic governor of Michigan, there was a kidnapping attempt against her by some supporters of Donald Trump because she imposed mask laws in Michigan. And I think we'd probably see that the other way around if we had a more assertive response to coronavirus from a Biden administration with Republican state governors refusing to kind of follow the regulations set from the top. So America's COVID response, I'm afraid to say, is probably going to be a bit of a mess, whoever wins, in my opinion. But certainly Trump's own personality has made things a bit worse.
That's incredible. So the governor of Michigan tried to encourage people to wear masks, and people queued up to kidnap her?
Yeah, there was a kidnapping conspiracy by people who were supporters of President Trump, and President Trump has had lock her up in some of his rallies directed at the governor of Michigan. So that's the current state of play over there.
Who's that? Didn't he used to say that about Hillary Clinton?
Yeah.
He's just dusting down an old slogan. That's terrible. What do you think about? Do you think it's mainly economic consequences that America's or the USA has suffered, Jack, or is there any other ways it's suffering because of corona? I did actually look up. Apparently, there's been it's been really high this week. Yes, 1,000 people have died every day in the last week in the United States. Does it look like the country can come out of Corona, do you think?
Yes, well, I mean, yeah, clearly it is a horrendous virus that has struck the world, and Trump is particularly incompetent when dealing with it. I think that it's a good analogy in some senses to compare Trump to Boris Johnson. There are certain similarities, I think, between both of them. Trump is representing a political party that is, well, Trump, I guess, is not such a good representative of capitalism. And one thing that I would maybe like to raise that I don't think has been raised so far is, so obviously all of us here oppose Trump and view him as harmful for the US on all manner of aspects. But we have to ask, why did he win? And I think, there are a number of reasons, but one thing that I would like to come back to is that, I mean, personally, obviously, you might be able to tell from my accent, I'm not an American citizen, and I will not be eligible to vote in this election. But I do not envy Americans with this choice between these two parties. I think the situation that Americans face today was best summed up by Gore Vidal, who said that there is America has one political party. The Property Party, with two right wings. And to be honest, in my opinion, I don't think socialists can support the Democratic Party. I think that actually it was years and years of Democratic Party management or mismanagement of the economy, and managing the economy in the interests of big business. So whilst the billionaires increased their profits, you had wages stagnant for the vast majority of people, caused a huge amount of anger and discontent with the Democrats. So the main reason I think for the Democrats losing the election was this anger. So Clinton, for example, got 3.4 million less votes in 2016 than Obama did in 2008. Trump as well, he won Wisconsin. But he won Wisconsin by getting fewer votes than Mitt Romney. So, yes, look, I think that socialists, I think that left activists should be careful about supporting Joe Biden, because what will happen if Joe Biden comes in? We've seen this, massive economic crisis, which now means that debt as a percentage of US GDP, debt is almost greater than US yearly GDP. This will eventually have to be paid back, and it will be paid back through austerity, through attacks on the working class. Then where will people look? And I think the comment about Trump possibly coming back in 2024 is an accurate one, to be honest, because if Biden comes in on a vote, which in my opinion, I'd be interested to hear what the other people attending have to say, but in my opinion, the vote at the moment is more anti-Trump than pro-Biden. And if Biden comes in, and I think, he will manage the economy in the interest of big business, not in the interest of the working class, you'll see even more anger and possibly an even bigger swing to the right at a later date.
Well, that's worrying, isn't it? Priya, does that make sense to you? I mean, how do you feel Biden is seen over there in the States? Can he rescue the country, or?
Yes, Biden has... Actually, Biden definitely has a lead in the polls. But as far as rescuing the country, nobody has a magic wand. I mean, these things happen as they're supposed to. Biden cannot just cure the country of COVID. He cannot just boost the economy as is. This is a slow process, and other things need to be taken in consideration. It's not only Biden's job.
But sometimes people make political judgments on candidates, and sometimes they just look at whether they're cuddly or not, or whether they're nice to animals, or generally seem to be a pleasant chap. I mean, is Biden going down well? Do people like him?
So far, yes. From his policies and what he has promised, like people like someone who is for the middle class, someone who wants to help them, someone who wants to also allow people to come to America instead of just putting bans on Muslims and hurting other people who want to visit. He doesn't want to pull families apart. Another thing about his response to the COVID, he will allow healthcare professionals to respond to the pandemic, not just politicians. With Biden, it's more like it's about we, not about me.
That's a very neat slogan. How do you feel, Tom? Do you think if you were still out in the States, would you be voting Biden with joy?
Well, so I did vote, actually. I voted by post. And I'm happy to give away my right to a secret ballot. I did. I'm in California. I didn't vote for Biden. I voted for Howie Hawkins, who's the Green candidate running on a sort of eco-socialist platform. And my feeling on that was, it's not, in California, it's going to be heavily Democrat anyway. And I thought, we need a significant third-party vote potentially to push Biden to the left. Now, that said, if I was in a competitive state, I probably would have voted for Biden, both as an anti-Trump vote and because there are, very significant material differences to a Biden win for specific groups. So, for example, there were people in my school growing up who were dreamers. So they undocumented immigrants came into the US when they were very young. Under Biden, they would most likely have a pathway to kind of legalization, regularized immigration status. Under Trump, they've lost social security numbers, their ability to find work, and, could be facing deportation with a second Trump administration. So I think the point to note is that is, there's a big material difference with a Biden win and Trump win for them. They are a small subset of the overall undocumented immigrant population who would still be facing a hostile environment and immigration internment under a Biden presidency. There were plenty of people locked up in camps on the southern border under Obama as well, is the sad truth of, and I think there's a lot of truth to what Jack is saying. So a Biden win, I hope it happens because it's definitely going to help some people, but overall, I don't think it's going to solve most of America's difficulties at the minute. I think it would potentially set the stall for a broader reaction to the right. And actually, sorry, I know I'm taking up a bit of time here, but one example I would use is, Jenny, you know that housing and homelessness stuff is kind of my thing quite a lot. Under Obama and Joe Biden, there were just scything slashes of billions of dollars to the HUD budget. So that's the housing and urban development budget. And homelessness, particularly in California, but in other states as well, was just exploding. And so then when Trump got in, he saw this Obama legacy of growing homelessness, but also the rhetoric of housing first and all of these positive policies that just weren't being properly funded. And he responded to that by saying, well, actually, these progressive policies, which Obama is talking about, they're not working at all. They're not relevant at all. Therefore, we have to resort to criminalization. And that has been, Trump's byword for the last 4 years. So that's my worry with a Biden win. I hope he wins, but it's quite possible that a lot of his policies, particularly if there's big promises and not much delivery, are just going to set up more of a reaction to right-wing populism.
Priya, you touched a bit on sort of equalities measures and the fact that Biden wouldn't be so hostile to Muslims and so on, which is understandable. Could you go take that a bit further? One thing that interests me is Kamala Harris is Biden's running partner. I can't remember seeing her out campaigning. It's all been about these two white men. And we had such a chance with Kamala Harris to sort of broaden out a little bit, make a bit of reality out of the sort of lip service given to equalities. Where is the equalities agenda in the States in this election?
Yes, I agree with you. For Kamala Harris, what I feel about her is that she would be a voice for the South Asian minorities, those who are from India, from Pakistan, from Bangladesh. She is their hope. And she does have some strong opinions about some oppression that was happening, like with the situation with Kashmir. She had a strong opinion on that. And she does want to help support Muslims, and with Biden, he wants to protect those who are transgender, gay, lesbian rights. They have rights too. And that is what I feel. It's a voice for minorities.
But and is the US electorate really picking that up? Is that an issue actually of debate? I mean, over here in Europe, I mean, we were surprised a few years ago to see the Republic of Ireland vote to legalise same-sex marriage, apparently very easily with a large majority. We never thought that would happen in a country with such a sort of Roman Catholic background. So that sort of surprised us. And I'm just wondering, you know, is this equalities agenda something that's really being discussed at the grassroots in the States, or is it passing people by? Is it just the ethnic minorities who are taking an interest? Where are we at in terms of that issue there?
So can you repeat the question?
Just where are we at in terms of, do voters take equalities issues seriously, or is it just sort of commentators who notice in passing?
Yes, definitely. I think voters are for gender equality, and that's very important, because even in the last election, what happened was that there was a somewhat qualified woman candidate who lost to a man who was less qualified, and that happens in the workplace. It's tough, gender equality even today. So that's definitely on the cards. And race is also another factor. So if we're looking for someone who's not going to be racist, someone who's going to keep families together, and Spanish, they're also a target of this, then yeah, I think that Biden would be a better choice than Trump. And yeah, gender equality is definitely important. You can't overlook that.
Okay, going back a little bit to the economy now, I just want to sort of touch on US foreign policy and also what the election means a bit for the UK. I don't know who wants to pick up on this, but obviously now with Brexit going on, we're looking for some new trade deals, and there was some Tory government MP on the radio today talking about, we've got this deal almost signed and sealed with trade deal signed and sealed with the States, and both parties support it. And of course, what people said about the economy is quite worrying. So how do we see the sort of future economic relationship between the UK and the US, depending on who wins? I don't know. Who can answer that? Jack, is that something you followed?
Yes, well, in a certain sense, I think it's quite funny to watch the kind of sweating that Boris Johnson and his clique are involved in at the moment. They've spent some time trying to cozy up to Trump over the recent years. Boris as well, in a similar sense to Trump, represents a lot of his own interests rather than being a consistent representative of the capitalist class, which he should be as the leader of the Conservative Party, would have thought. And I think that one thing that will cause trouble for him is the Ireland issue. Biden has spoken about his Irish heritage. We've had Nancy Pelosi as well has warned that Britain should not expect any trade deal if they are to risk peace in Northern Ireland. And so yes, I think if we saw, you could certainly have Britain falling even further in its status on a global scale, rather than being a special relationship, which was always really more favouring the US than Britain. I think you could definitely see if Britain was considered a kind of, entry point to the European Union for the American ruling class, that would definitely not be the case any longer, and you could see Germany becoming a more important partner to the US than Britain.
Goodness. And have you followed US trade, Tom? Have you got a view on this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess it would. I mean, an overall US trade policy, a Biden win would probably make those trade relationships more consistent. Trump has deviated from the norm mainly by just throwing tariffs in various directions whenever he kind of felt like it. And it doesn't feel like that has had necessarily a positive impact on the US economy overall. I suppose what Biden would be able to do, I think it's absolutely right to say the Democrats are very attuned to I mean, I suppose the link to Ireland I hadn't really thought of. That's a good point from Jack. But then also they're anti-Brexit on principle, and I think that's partly because they don't think it's in the interests of finance capital. And Biden, I would say, is a representative of quite a lot of finance capital. I mean, he got more donations than Trump from Wall Street by a margin of 4-1. So I think anyone who's expecting Biden to be resisting to overall global neoliberal politics is going to be in for quite a sharp shock. But that said, when it comes to issues like Brexit, that is probably going to make it a lot harder for the UK to find much favour from a Biden administration, if there is a Biden administration, because like everyone has said, it is the early days yet in the night.
Yes. I mean, I suppose, well, we'll have to see, won't we? We may not know the result until January. I've got this horrible sort of feeling that we might sort of have to postpone the inauguration or something, not because of COVID, but because the election hasn't been declared yet. 100 million votes cast by post before polling day. I mean, over here, Priya, we see we have reports, that that Trump is complaining that there's postal votes inevitably mean election fraud, and actually there's not much evidence of that in the States or in the UK. So it could just be being raised to cast aspersions on the safety of the ballot. But how's that going down in the States? I mean, do people feel the ballot is going to be dodgy because so many votes were cast in advance, or do people see it more pragmatic? Well, we didn't have to queue at polling stations. How safe do people think the ballot's going to be?
Yes, so definitely voting at home is one of the safest ways to vote. But if you are going out to vote, then obviously I think most people here are voting early, have already voted. And because the day of the election, it's going to be packed at the polls. And that's just sort of a risk that a lot of my friends have voted early. In fact, I also voted early, and I voted in a place that was kind of less crowd.
Yeah. So, but all those early votes do mean it could take a long time to count them, and much longer to hear the result. So, are people hopeful there will be a result?
It could take a long time. The same situation happened like 2000. I think a lot of last-minute people will be heading to the polls today. And the polls close at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So, it's about a half an hour left, according to Boston, New York, elsewhere. Over here, it's 2:30. So I'm assuming that more people are at the polls today as well.
Right. So I'm not quite sure when we're going to hear the result. It could go on for a while.
I believe. Yeah.
So, and does the recent experiences where I think there's been a number of there was a sort of dirty tricks complaint today, wasn't there? Somebody apparently was phoning around one of the states, leaving people answer phone messages telling them not to vote, and there was some suggestion that that this is I don't know who's sort of behind that dirty trick. Yes, the FBI are investigating automated calls. I don't know if that story's broken in New York in particular, and the police are sort of investigating it now. I wasn't sure if that's really a genuine scam that's been happening, or if maybe the authorities have provoked that to give themselves extra footage, extra mileage to complain about the result on if they don't like it. So I wasn't sure who's behind that.
Priya, I don't know if you've seen any of these, but in California, wasn't there a story about the California Republican Party admitting to having put out fake early voting ballot boxes, so that people were putting their early votes into these fake ballot boxes, which then weren't going to get counted? So there might be quite a lot of stories like that around.
Yes, unfortunately, incident like that did happen. And also another disturbing trend I've seen is that some Democrats are being bullied, like they're being threatened that, no, you cannot vote, or you're not showing up in the register. But if that is the case, then provisional voting, I mean, that's another way to go. And with provisional voting, you can just go vote and then call in later to see if your vote has been counted or not. Something is better than nothing. Because voting is a right. I mean, everyone should vote, and these kind of tricks should not happen. It's ridiculous.
Good heavens. So, I mean, there's been so many questions raised about American elections in the US in recent years. I mean, do people still actually have confidence in the system? Do people still think the electoral college system is a good one? I've heard that changing populations mean that some people have been querying how many votes their state is allocated in the electoral college, because it's now out of sync. I mean, are people questioning the system, Priya?
No, because the electoral college is still the way that the candidate will be decided. It's not like based on a popular vote. And I'm confident in that system.
So how do you feel about the electoral college, Jack? Do you think it's a sound system for a place as big as the United States? I mean, when we began, you were talking about this. There's actually 51 different elections taking place.
Yes. No, I mean, I think, well, first of all, I would say that there is massive dissatisfaction with all of the kind of major institutions in America at the moment. I've seen polling that says that only 22% of voters say that the election will definitely be free and fair. 3/4 of voters as well are of either party are concerned about violent protests taking place after the election. And I think the one thing to recognize, I would say, is that America, like all capitalist so-called democracies, is not really democratic whatsoever. If you just to go on to the electoral college vote, surely we would recognize that democracy should mean one person, one vote. Well, in just to give you some examples, if you compare, so the way that the electoral college vote works is that it benefits people who live in rural areas, more conservative areas. It impacts more on, it basically makes working class people's votes matter less. So if you look at, for example, a comparison, Wyoming gets one electoral college vote per 184,000 people, whereas in California it's one per 723,000 people. And it's stuff like that which means that Clinton was able to lose the last election despite the fact that she got 3 million more votes. There are also many lots and lots of things, barriers that are put up to democratic participation, which on their own might not seem very much, but all taken together make it a lot harder to vote if you're from an ethnic minority, if you're working class. Just to give some examples, so 36 of the US states have ID requirements for voters. Now, that might seem logical, perhaps, to stop this so-called voter fraud, but 21 million US citizens don't have government-issued photo ID because, it could be too expensive. But even if it's free, in some places it's free, applicants still have to cover, travel expenses and Yeah, just also as well, I mean, there are people who are cut out from the vote altogether. You've got 3.4 million Puerto Ricans who can't vote, despite the fact they're a so-called US territory. And I mean, in actual fact, I would say it's a de facto colony. 5.2 million convicted felons who can't vote, even if they've served out their time in jail. And this also, just to come back to my earlier point, this disproportionately affects people from ethnic minorities. So we have a situation in the US where 6.2% of the adult Black population is denied the vote, compared to 1.7% of the non-Black population. So there are lots and lots of barriers to participation put in the way, basically, of participation. And I'd say this is not an accident. It's done in order to make sure that the status quo is maintained, basically. Yeah, and then I'd also say as well, I mean, just to come back to the point earlier, it's very significant, I think, these donations from Wall Street to the Biden campaign. You know, like any good capitalist, these are investments that are meant to bring a return, and they will expect that Biden runs the country in their interests and not in the interests of the vast majority of American people. And I think that will be the case for as long as we have a capitalist society in America. And that, I think, is why, you know, I mean, I sympathize with, you know, the vote for Howie Hawkins. But I think that the main task for socialists, for activists in the US, is to focus on the building of a mass working class party. America is one of the few countries where there's never been a mass party of the working class. There's no party for us in America. It's two parties of property. And that, I think, is the fundamental issue, really, that we should discuss.
Well, we're not going to start discussing it now. We'll have to come back to that another day. But just quickly, Tom, I mean, can you see a mass party of the working class being established in the States? Is it on the agenda?
Well, I suppose there have been, I mean, I think you've got a very different political party model over in the US, and that's something that has to be accounted for. So whereas over here, you've got a kind of a party where people are actually paid up members, and you've got an organized system. People can be expelled from parties in the UK, as we've obviously seen with the unfortunate recent events in the Labour Party. But over in the US, you're not no one is really a member. Like, I'm a registered Democrat, which means I can vote in their primaries, but that doesn't mean that I've paid them any money. That doesn't mean that I've signed up to agree to any of their rules or agree to any of their positions. So I think there is potentially more prospect of doing what, for example, the Democratic Socialists of America, and I think we can maybe disagree on to what extent they always follow a solid socialist platform, or whether they're more social democratic, or what exactly. I think they've got different factions like every other group. But the Democratic Socialists of America have taken the strategy of, within the Democratic Party, that's where they can kind of build a bit more of a mass party. And it has potentially been successful. I mean, in California was won by Bernie Sanders, which someone who calls himself a socialist winning the biggest state in the US, that is an achievement. We'll see where we can go from there. I'm less optimistic about a party being formed outside of the Democratic Party, but I think within the Democrats, you can sort of be within and against that kind of party establishment.
Yes, I mean, I think all I can say on this really is, you know, the US system and the UK system of organising political parties. The two systems are very different. One of them has led to Trump, and one of them has led to Boris. So it seems that it may not be the fault of the may not be the fault of the system, really, but it would be yes, different histories. Let's just have a quick opportunity to talk about actual foreign policy. I think relatively older than all of you, possibly older than the ages of the three guests put together. But whenever I think of US foreign policy, I think of Nicaragua, which I think is just terribly, terribly out of date. But certainly Mexico is a near neighbor, and trade-driven foreign policy, and bizarre run-ins with North Korea and hostility to China, Trump has certainly been quite different from Obama before him on foreign policy. Can the US maintain its position as one of the leading countries politically in the world, as a political superpower, as we head through probably a massive coming recession? So how has Trump been, and do you think Biden would offer anything different actually in the world? Tom, I'm coming straight to you. What do you think about that, Trump's record on foreign policy?
Well, I'd say he's been different in some ways from previous US presidents. I think that's mainly been in his unpredictability. I think there's quite a significant amount of US foreign policy which has been continuous over that time. In terms of, I mean, I'm thinking particularly of their Middle Eastern policy. It's not like Obama was elected in 2008 on a platform of withdrawing from foreign wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He still went in Libya. And I don't think that certainly hasn't had the outcome, whatever was meant by originally, it certainly hasn't had a positive outcome for Libyans. So I think Trump's foreign policy, it's definitely been very erratic. There are quite a few different actors who can feel rightly that they've been wronged by Donald Trump. I'm thinking particularly of the Kurds and the SDF, who he used to defeat the Islamic State basically single-handedly, and then made a dodgy deal with Erdogan in Turkey to go in and effectively attempt genocide. So I think there's Trump's foreign policy, the erratic nature of it wouldn't necessarily continue under a Biden administration. Whether or not that would actually help that many people in the world, I think is less clear-cut, because a Biden foreign policy would quite likely still get involved in a lot of international wars and to the detriment of the people living there. I would say the one advantage of a Biden presidency is he's probably less likely to press the big red nuclear button just on a whim. But that doesn't mean that he wouldn't do it for a officially very good reason. So I'm not all that optimistic about US foreign policy going forward.
Yes, less likely to think, I wonder what this button is for, and forget that he's been told. Yeah, fair enough. Jack, what do you think about the foreign policy? Should we fear a second term of Trump?
Yes, well, I mean, in my opinion, I think that I agree that Trump has behaved very erratically. He says a lot of very silly things, and he makes a lot of ridiculous comments on Twitter. I think, though, that in substance, he's not been that radically different from Obama, and actually that a Biden administration wouldn't be, again, so radically different from Trump either. I think that often always foreign policy is an extension of domestic policy, and we will not see a kind of a humane foreign policy that to use Tom's phrase, would help the people of the world. We've seen, for example, in a way to try and win support of people in Florida, for example, people who've left from Venezuela and Cuba, that Biden has been criticizing Trump for not being hard enough on Venezuela and Cuba. This is hinting at intervention in these countries. We've also seen that Biden has again also not said that he'll go back on the moving of the US embassy to Jerusalem. One thing that I would say, though, is that I think that whoever wins the presidency, what we're seeing is the relative decline of US imperialism. The US is less and less able to intervene on a world scale. And that means that we're seeing local powers become emboldened, basically. And I think that that is due to forces that are much greater than Biden or Trump can change. And we will see a growing instability on a world scale, with local powers feeling more free to act. And that I don't think will change regardless of who wins this election.
Well, thank you for that. So I think the last main question, as we're sort of beginning to draw to an end now, to Priya, is we're all sort of told over here that the United States is big. Hello, Priya's helper. The United States is big, but people manage to sort of be contained within it. They're not necessarily that interested in the rest of the world or knowledgeable about it. Is foreign policy important to the US voter, do you think?
So, say it again, please.
I'm just wondering, is the US foreign policy important to US residents, to voters?
Absolutely. And from what I understand about Biden's policy is that he wants to elevate diplomacy and he wants to strengthen alliances with Japan, with Southern Korea, also with other South Asian democracies. And another thing, I feel that he wants to protect the economic future as well by addressing global concerns that have been overlooked in the past. So definitely, that's an important thing. I feel that the US and the UK has a good relationship as is. So regardless of the candidate, that will stay intact. But if we're looking to strengthen alliances, then yes, that's something we should look at.
And I suppose, without going into detail, I suppose we should just say that we've probably got a bit more hope on the old climate change policy from Biden than we have.
Yes, that is something he is addressing also. Climate change, he's working with the Environmental Protection Agency as well. That's something that also needs to be addressed.
Well, the latest headlines from the BBC say that Joe Biden has told reporters he is hopeful as the voting continues across the USA and edges towards the president. But uncertain, he's not being complacent. Jack, go on. Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to say one thing. I think that there are plenty of reasons for us to be hopeful. I mean, I've been a bit negative, I think, on the discussion so far. I think probably I'm pretty disgusted with both of the candidates, really. But I think that there are huge reasons to be positive for positive change in the US. We've just seen some of the most amazing movements in the history of the US with the Black Lives Matter movement, with a huge proportion of US people involved, both white and black people involved in fighting for change. This movement it was so powerful as well. You had the burning down of a police precinct in Minneapolis with 54% of American people in support of that action. I think that shows the real mood in the US at the moment, which isn't reflected in the two main parties because neither of them offer any change, in my opinion. And I think that the time has never been better for putting forward socialist ideas. You've got 40% of American people are in favor of socialism, according to, I think it was a Gallup poll. This is the land of McCarthyism. 40%. And then this gets even more interesting when you look at young people. I've seen that 1/3 of millennials are in favor of communism in America. That's incredible, really, with what we're told about the US. And you've got 70% of young people in favor of socialism. I think that it was a real shame, to be honest, that Bernie Sanders didn't choose to stand as an independent, because that could have been a real step forward for the US working class. He could have used these 1.4 million donors that he had to form a new party, and that could have been the party of hope, rather than these two, not even real political parties that we have at the moment, and this poor choice for the US working class.
Thank you so much. I'm going to consider that as the last word, I think. I'd like to thank the three of you so much for joining, and somehow I feel that we've almost got more questions asked than answered. As we've identified a lot of issues, but not necessarily what can be done about them. And of course, that's the sort of the area that perhaps needs most attention. All I can say is that the election is, for me, here in E14, a long way away. But at the same time, I know that around the world there are people in poverty, there are people dying, there are people injured, there are people separated from their loved ones directly as a result of what world leaders such as Trump, such as Boris, such as Macron as well, actually do. So these distant elections are actually very important, and perhaps that's right. The question that we should actually be asking ourselves is now, what can we do about it? Much as I'd love to answer Jack's question there about the formation of new political parties, I'm going to restrain myself and hope that the three of us, I so enjoyed the discussion. I hope very much that you'll all come back again and join us on other topics as well. So we'll cross our fingers for a good result tonight, and we'll see our viewers on 2020 Vision. We'll see you again next week when we might be able to talk about the result, or not, who knows. So thank you very much, guests, and good night to our viewers. Good night.
Thank you. It was wonderful.